How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. What we do with this hour and that one is what we are doing. Does anybody recognize those lines from Annandale? Tinker's Creek? I hope you like the scripture reading about the cows this morning. I was thinking about how I went to a dairy farm in Holland one time, and it was just one farmer, and he had 220 cows, and he had like a circular milking platform, so the cows walked on, and they had their bottoms towards him, and their heads were in a feed trough, and he sat in the middle in one place, and the cows just slowly went around, and he just sat there and milked them as they went around in a circle. And he told me that he could recognize the bottoms of 220 cows. And so I was thinking about that, and I thought, I don't know if I can recognize the bottoms of everybody, but I'm pretty sure he can recognize all your faces and cares deeply about you and wants you to have abundant life. And so that's why we're doing this panel today on living a balanced life, because that's a huge component of having an abundant life. And I'm sure you've all heard the idea, good is the enemy of best. That you can do lots of good things, but if you do too many, it's not best. I've always liked that. So we're going to answer, they are going to answer 3 questions today for us. I'm asking them to take 2 minutes to answer each question. And that should lead up to 18 minutes if I did my math correctly. And then we'll have some time afterwards for audience participation, people's ideas and thoughts and comments and questions. So does that sound like a plan? All right, we'll go first with Caitlin. So I'll just hand you the mic and then I'll ask the first question. First question is, this is Caitlin, this is Sammy, this is Ben, just in case you don't know. Now you know. Okay, Caitlin, and the rest of you. How did you determine what your values in life are?
Okay, are you gonna give me a high sign when I'm gonna? I don't think I'm gonna go anywhere near 2 minutes, honestly. So, which is great because we want to have more time to chat amongst all of us. But so this is an interesting question for me because it sort of assumes that I have determined what my values are, and that they're kind of static. I'm yep, here they are, and that's not really true. I would say that my values are fairly consistently evolving, to a certain degree anyway. I think there are some baseline things that have stayed fairly constant. But in fact, I would say that one of my values right now is growth and expansion and change to a certain degree. And so that means that it's a moving target, this question for me. But there have been, in terms of the process, again, it's not really well defined. It's not something that this might be a surprise to you, Pamela, because you chose me for this panel, but it's not something that I've really spent a lot of sort of intentional effort thinking about, other than at certain points in my life. I think I've gone through a bit of an exercise of that at a couple points, and it's usually in my adult life anyway, and it's often been at times of transition or at decision points in terms of career or things like that, when I've sort of sat down and thought about it with any intention. And one of the methods that I have used when I've been trying to do that is just simply to kind of pay attention to what makes me angry would be one thing, what really bothers me, because I think that's a good indication of what of a value that I might have. And on the other side of that, to pay attention to what really draws me and what really makes me feel alive. So that's a really wishy-washy way of deciding what your values are. But I think that one of the things that I've been working on in my life is trying to listen to my own intuition as a manifestation of God's Spirit, because that certainly wasn't sort of how I was brought up to think of my own intuition and my own feelings. So that's been a good exercise for me. I think just treating my feelings as information to determine what some of my values are. So like, for example, I have a really hard time being patient with children when they're being, I'm trying to think of a better word. Pompous, that's a good word. Or like, bragging when they're playing sports like that. I can't handle it. And like, I love kids and I know that they are not finished, but that is like something I really can't handle. And what I have determined from that is that maybe one of my values is like humility. Yeah, in the past, I think I've really, like, when I was younger, I really looked outside of myself to sort of like, for someone else to tell me what I should value, and I'm learning to accept that that's not going to be the same for everyone, and that my values might be different than other people's. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Enough.
I want to echo what Caitlin said, that values are a constantly shifting thing. So if you're not changing your values constantly through your life, you're not really living. Because life has changed, right? Everything changes. So if you have the same values you had when you were 3, you're not going to function in the world, And anyways, so really, this is a really important question, actually. How do you determine what your values in life are? Because you're going to have to do it all the time. So it's, it seems a simple question, but it's actually quite important. And you start out, obviously, you're kind of given values by your family and your parenting and whatever that looked like, for good, for better or worse, and then you go from there. And typically, if you're kind of lazy about it, you just tack on values that match the values you already have. And that can, like I said, that can be a lazy way, and sometimes that'll work out if you happen to have a particularly good life where you're surrounded by good influences. But if you're not, that can really go south quickly. And I would say that I would love to say, I logically, carefully, spiritually, prayerfully picked out all my values. But the truth is, when I became a Christian, this guy, the evangelist, explained the most logical, careful presentation of the gospel of Christ. And that's not why I got up and gave my heart to Jesus. It's because my heart was strangely warmed. In the end, it was what Caitlin also said, that often it's about feelings. And also, that can go south in a hurry if those feelings are, in fact, a bad prejudice. So you need to allow your heart to be warmed the right way.
Thank you.
And also, one thing I'd like to say is the hardest values to get straight are the ones when you need to adopt a value that is actually diametrically opposed to what you're believing right now. For example, for years I firmly believed that homosexuality was the devil, of the devil. And then I figured out I are one. So this was a value that needed to change. And that's not easy. So what I had to do in that situation, if you're going to adopt a value that's radically different to what you have had so far, that doesn't tie into your current values. I mean, it's easy if you can just latch it onto current values you have. If it doesn't, then what you really have to do is backtrack back through your value growth, if you like, to where the path diverged to where you are now. And that's where you have to start from and tack your new value on at that place. And so sometimes with your values you actually have to backtrack and redo them.
Thank you.
If that's a word picture that can help.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you for that insight. I probably have less than 2 minutes.
Sorry, we popped the sign on that one. Let you go first.
No, so every time that I have considered this question as it was posed to me, I feel like I've iterated as I've had conversations with friends and with Andrea and what have you. And so for myself, speaking from myself, I am a truth seeker. And I say this for myself because sometimes when I say this, it's like, unlike other, that's not what I mean. I feel like we're probably all truth seekers, and we're interested in the truth, and we're constantly asking ourselves, what is the truth? And the values that I bring with me in my life are forever changing, as you so eloquently said. And I am allowing them to emerge and just to float through all the swirling of life and the tests and tribulations and what have you. I allow those values to show themselves, emerge themselves. And I feel like my tactic, let's say, to do that is to seek truth. And I do that through, actually what you were saying is feeling an emotion and going inwards. And I've done that for such a long time now, and it was not necessarily taught to me that way as a child. Sort of in an indirect way it was. But as an adult, I've discovered that myself, is to go inwards and discover what is it that's true to me. And then I try to see myself in the other and think about what the other person, plural, everybody, what would be truth to you? And the exercise is taking what I think is truth. It's not necessarily truth, I'm just saying that's what I think it is. That's what has emerged for me. And what I think other people think is truth. And then overlap those two things. And the differences fall away, and then the overlapping things persist. And then that helps inform myself on what is really important to me.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great.
Okay.
You can go first.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yes. The next question is, how do you divide up your time to reflect your values?
How do I divide up my time to reflect my values? Okay, so getting into my values then. One of my values is balance. I'm not gonna actually preface much of this, but I'll say, ever since I realized what my astrological sign, one of my astrological signs, however that all works, is a Libra, and a Libra is a scale, is a balance. For myself, I actually resonated with that quite a bit, and so I divide up my time. So the way that I operate is I see my life as a balance, if you can see it as like a scale, where you have a fulcrum in the middle and you have a plank across it. And my experiences through life and the inputs into my life and what have you are piling up on either side. It's an analogy, and so obviously that scale can take many different forms depending on the context of which part of my life that scale is applying to. But my approach to life, how I divide up my time, is trying to add up the two sides so that the thing kind of stays nicely in the middle. And also not so that it's just nicely in the middle, but also that the plank itself is not offset to one side and there's a whole bunch of weight on one side counterbalancing a big levered arm on the other side. But that the whole thing is sort of an aesthetically pleasing image, as an image for myself. So that's kind of my metaphysical way of going about things.
I do math. Tithing is a principle in Scripture that should not be taken literally at all. But the idea is you should be able to give at least 10% of your time, money, labor, whatever, to anything that you hold dear. That is really actually part of you and your identity. So math. As I say this, everybody add in your head. So 33% of your life is going to be used on sleep. That's your biological necessity. Another 33%, because we do 8-hour days on average, is going to be work. So that makes 66%. Another 10%, if we're tithing and we're Christians, should be on your faith. And another 10% you will likely want to spend on family life, and if you're single, on finding a family. So what percentage are we up to now? 86%.
Yep.
So that leaves only just over about 10%. So you have time in your life for one more thing that you can identify with. And the problem is we get unbalanced when we try to have 3 or 4 other things that we want to make our identity. I want to be a sports athlete, and I want to be an artist, and I want to be a musician. And then either you do too much or you do a lot of little things badly, and you're not satisfied. There is some wiggle room in that these guys, they incorporate their music into their faith, and so you can sort of fudge the lines a little bit that way. If you and your wife both love skydiving, you can do skydiving as part of your family life, like you can fudge things, but in the end, you have to be very aware of that math. That if you are a Christian and you care about family, then that really only leaves room for one other thing. For me right now, that's sports, because I have a physical job and I need to stay in shape, and I'm dealing with middle age, weight gain and stuff. So,
Thank you.
So math. Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like this. I'm going to jump off that a little bit because I feel like my answer to this question wasn't super strong.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of fudging because I am a person who tends to want to do all of the things, but also to do them well. So, and I think one of the really important ways that I try to do that and sort of overlap is I have tried to pursue a way to have my work hours reflect my values to a certain extent, and I want to recognize that that's a position of privilege to be able to do that to whatever degree, but something that I have tried to do especially as I've kind of come out of pretty full-time caregiving and have been in a position to be deciding, okay, what am I going to be spending my work hours on, that 33%, because that's a big chunk of time, and so I think if I am able to reflect my values and what I'm spending those hours on, then that's a way that I would like to look at dividing up my time to reflect my values. And I'm going to challenge your 10% on family thing, because honestly, that seems real.
That's a minimum.
That's real low.
That's a minimum.
At least for where I'm at in my life right now, I recognize that we're all in different kind of stages of life, but the stage of life that I am in right now is very heavily weighted towards caregiving. It's tapering off a little bit, but so I also try to be intentional about how those hours of my life where I'm really focused on parenting my kids are also reflecting my values. So that might look like sharing what's important to me with them, and also to helping them discover what's important to them and kind of build their own value system. So I'm gonna
Thank
stop
you.
there.
You can go.
Oh,
Oh, right.
yeah.
Okay, then we'll give it to Sammy.
Our third and last question, so you can be thinking about what you want to talk about. That's hopefully related to this. What do you think you do well in living a balanced life, and what do you think you could do better?
We'll start with Sammy.
I'm going to do a political answer to this question and say that's not really the question. No, I could list what I'm doing well and what I'm not doing well as a self-critique very easily. But I felt when I looked at this question, I feel like you have to be careful of that self-critique because we live in an imperfect, unbalanced world. And so in reality, perfectly balanced life is somewhat a privilege of wealth.
Yes.
Yes. And the reality in our current economy is many, many people have to have a second job or a side hustle just to exist. People who aren't obnoxiously wealthy can't afford nannies and extra things like that. So like Caitlin said, you may invest a ton more time when you have young children and be very imbalanced that way. And so what I look at is how balanced am I doing in relation to what's possible? And I think there's a scripture in Philippians 4 where Paul was saying you must learn how to be abased and how to abound, which is the balanced scripture. And I think what he was saying is life circumstances, sometimes they'll have you way down and sometimes they'll have you way in the lap of luxury. And you've got to learn how to exist in a balanced state in whatever circumstances you're in. And so it's, yeah, you want to look at where am I balanced and unbalanced, like we're talking about. But in the end, if it's beyond your control, be forgiving of yourself as well. And
Thank you.
and I think that's an important thing. But that's sort of sideways to the question. So somebody else answer the question.
Okay, so where I went with this one was that I think for the most part, my personality lends itself to like seeking balance, and so I think it's maybe easier for me than it is for some people to sort of like find that place. But I also recognize that that's not the case for everyone, and that you know, I know a lot of people that could be seen as skewing towards one extreme or another in various ways, and I don't necessarily think that being good at finding individual balance is going to be. I don't think it's necessarily the way everyone is wired. And I actually think that if everyone tried to do that, we would lose some contrast and some depth in our communities. Because I know people that will give 150% to this thing over here, and I will learn a lot from those people. And that there will be people on the very opposite end of that spectrum. And I think that those extremes are sometimes where we really learn from each other. So I think, I mean, maybe one of the ways that I could do better is to sort of be aware of a way or two that I might skew particularly far in one direction, and to sort of explore that and see whether there are strengths that come out of that, and also to be aware of like, where is the other end of that spectrum and what could I learn from that as well. I just think communal balance could be better if we're if we're not necessarily all just trying to like stay in the middle.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, it's like every time I think about these questions and I muse about them, I iterate from where I once was answering them to now I feel like where I do well and where I don't do well, just speaking again completely about just complete self-reflection of my own perception of my life, I think are the same thing. I think where I do well is seeking truth and honoring my true self. And in the flip side of the same coin, I think that's where I also don't do well. And I maybe don't like that wording. It's not that I don't do well. I think it's just an area that I would love to continue to improve in. Because I see nothing but benefits in my own life, and I see benefits in other people's lives too. When I see other people pursuing their true self, I see truth like welling up, and what I see is good things and whole and completeness welling up within those individuals, and I feel that within myself too. So that's kind of two sides of the same coin.
Thank you.
Thank you, you guys. I love doing this. You always come up with stuff that surprises me. It's really interesting and helpful. Thank you. Yeah.